The internet, and in particular this platform, YouTube, is completely filled with content that inspires gear lust. From the extremely expensive to the extremely rare, novel, weird, and everything in between. And it can feel pretty draining to see a new piece of equipment every single week that makes it feel like you're trying to keep up with the latest kit. So in this video, I wanted to do the exact opposite of what the algorithm wants and talk about a lens that you might already own or might have already owned in the past. Lenses like this, the 18 to 55 Fujifilm kit lens, aren't just a stepping stone into the bottomless money pit that is a photography hobby, but actually a symbol of how far technology has come in enabling people to document their lives and create great art. So believe it or not, prime lenses were actually king up until around somewhere between the mid 70s and the mid 80s. But since then, zoom lenses have really caught up to primes in a big way. And now in practical terms, I would actually argue that the only reason really to own a prime lens over a zoom lens is the speed itself, or the maximum aperture. So if you rarely find yourself shooting in low light situations, or your photography simply just doesn't require a super shallow depth of field, then a compact zoom or a kit lens might just be the best option for the job. And I'll explain why in this video. I also want to share some tips on how you actually use a lens like this to its full potential, and why you might want to refrain from selling this lens off and moving on from it, especially in favor of a prime lens. So let's jump into the video. So you might have already seen the video that I posted from my trip to Europe, and I actually almost exclusively used my 18 to 55 kit lens from Fuji. Now it has to be said that this is an absolutely phenomenal lens for its size and weight, and it's not even one of the latest lenses from Fuji. This is quite an old one. On top of that, the fact that this lens kept my setup really lightweight and really manageable meant that I could go out and shoot entire days without really feeling like I needed a rest. It also gave me a really nice versatility of perspectives, from 18mm, which is around a 28mm 35mm equivalent, all the way out to around 80mm. So it meant that like 99.9% of the photos that I wanted to capture, I could do so with this lens. And given that I'm also shooting on a 40 megapixel sensor, even if I do need a little bit more reach, there's no harm in cropping a little bit to get there. Of course, being in a very beautiful place, a very interesting place, does actually really help in the types of images that you're able to create. And that is actually a huge tip that I give to beginner photographers, is spend your money on the photo shoots themselves rather than the equipment. So rather than going and spending $3,000 on a premium zoom lens or up to $10,000 on a kit of 1.4 primes, you can take that money and put it into any kind of photo shoot that you want to create, whether it's an overseas trip, getting a model, hiring a makeup artist and a stylist and a beautiful location. Really, you can do some amazing things with even a modest budget. I know plenty of people who use the excuse of not having anything interesting to photograph or not being able to afford going away on these trips, and yet if you look at their camera bag, it is stacked with expensive gear. So by keeping it bare bones, sticking with your inexpensive kit lens, you're focusing on what you're actually shooting rather than how you're shooting it. Of course, your method and your skills really matter, like your composition, your lighting, all those kinds of things, but then I find that also gear gets lumped into this kind of conversation, like your choice of equipment, but really this is one of the least important things when it comes to creating great images. Even some of my favorite editorial shoots that I've done recently have been shot on the 18 to 55 lens, and I really focused in on the lighting, the composition, the location, the pose, just relying on my versatile zoom lens to get the job done. And I was honestly really happy with the results, and it kind of took my mind off the gear and equipment for a little while. So what are some of my tips for shooting with a kit lens? First of all, keep it simple. Try to make your photographs more interesting by taking away things rather than adding things in. Think about making your photo more impactful, not more complicated. I find that especially with a lot of beginner photographers, they focus on having all of these compositional elements like reflections, leading lines, rule of thirds, symmetry, and they just try to stuff as many of these compositional elements into their photos as possible possible, and it just ends up being a jumbled mess. You do want your photos to be interesting, but you also don't want to overwhelm the viewer, giving them too much to look at. My next tip would be to think about your photos not as one-off pieces, but rather as a larger gallery. Often we think about images as, finding that one perfect photo that you can print out and hang on your wall. And while that is a nice goal to have, the bigger picture of photography is that a lot of the time we view multiple images at once, whether it's in a magazine or on a carousel post in Instagram. I found that there is a lot more to gain out of creating a story out of your images, or creating like a little world through multiple images, multiple compositions that all complement each other. You're able to add dimension to the scene and take the viewer on a little bit of a journey. Super wide perspectives like 16mm or extreme telephoto like 300mm can provide a perspective of the world that we simply cannot see through our own eyes. And that by default makes them novel. And I think a lot of beginner photographers, they sort of rely on this novelty, creating something that you don't usually see, and they mistake that for having interesting or impactful photographs. The great thing about a standard zoom lens, something like a 28-70, somewhere in that range, it means that you don't have access to these extremely novel perspectives. And so you need to come up with a way of showing the world in an interesting way, or capturing certain perspectives without using novelty as a crutch. And that can actually make you a much better photographer. So color is another huge tip, and I absolutely love using complementary colors, using color blocking, just really tuning my eye to notice colors that work together, or create compositions that immediately catch your eye because of the colors that are used. Contrast can really help to draw the eye in, or draw attention to subjects, not just between the lightness or the darkness of a subject or a scene, but the contrast between color, whether it's saturation or hue. This is a technique that works regardless of which lens you use. Using a shallow depth of field, a low aperture number like 1.4, 1.8, f2 can really help to separate your subject from the background and make some really beautiful images. But one technique that I see that's often underutilized is using layering or multiple subjects. Using a deeper depth of field, shooting on apertures like f8, f11, and f16 can really help to keep everything in focus, and you can really create this layered perspective where you've got subjects in the foreground and the background that complement each other. Depth of field can be sort of used like a cheat code for a lot of beginner photographers, and really experimenting with a greater depth of field can open up your photography to all kinds of different creative possibilities. And I highly recommend embracing a greater depth of field. And that's one thing that a lot of kit lenses can't do, because they can't go down to these super shallow apertures. You're often stuck at apertures like f4, f5.6. Okay, one last positive that I want to talk about with the kit lens is that it removes decision fatigue. So I remember one of my first trips many years ago, I brought so many different lenses with me. I had a super wide, had a bunch of 1.4 prime lenses, a super telephoto lens, and I just could never really decide on which lens I wanted to use for which situation. And it left me scrambling and running back and forth to the bag, constantly changing lenses, switching around perspectives. And I found that I wasted a lot of time sort of wondering or experimenting with different things. It is nice from time to time to have a lot of options, but honestly, limiting yourself is one of the most creatively freeing things that you can do. On top of that, when I carried all this equipment with me, I mentioned this before, like my back was aching. I was just completely destroyed after every single day out shooting. And the fact that when I got back to my room on my recent trip, I was excited to, sit down and look at the photos, do some editing. It was such a difference from those early travel days where when I got back to my room, all I wanted to do was just go to sleep. As always, all the photos in this video that you would have seen were edited with my Lightroom profile, and you can find that down in the description below. So that is it for the video. I really hope I inspired you to embrace your standard zoom lens a little bit more, and to get out and just focus on creating great photos. I want to thank you guys once again for sticking around for another video, and I'll see you all in the next one.